Thanks for being here, everybody. My name is Amber. Saskia, for you that I haven't met before. Last week we talked about soil and seeds, which are the two main building blocks of urban ag. And today we're going to talk about light and air, which are two other really important aspects of growing things. So does anyone know what plants do with light and air? I'm sure you've heard this before in some of your classes before. What is it, Ace? You got it? Oh, photosynthesis? Yeah. So plants create energy in their leaves just like we do by using light and air. And basically they can turn carbon dioxide into sugars that help them to grow. So it's really vital for them to have light and air in order to do that, or else they wouldn't have energy. And for humans, we need the oxygen that is the byproduct that they create in order to breathe. So it's a really important symbiosis that we have with plants. So why is light important for growing plants? Kind of just answered that a little bit. So light works with the plants, works with chlorophyll in the leaves to create energy through photosynthesis. Inside the leaves, there's little organelles called chloroplasts that contain, it's basically little organs that absorb light and turn it into sugars. The sun has special light waves that affect plants. It's mostly the blue and red light waves. We only see white light coming from the sun, but plants absorb those two and reflect green, which is why plants look green. So they're actually reflecting the green waves of light. They're not actually green, which blows my mind, but somehow that's true.
They're not green, then what color are they?
What's that?
They're not green, then what color are they?
That is the big question for me. I'm kind of confused by that as well, but you know, the way our eyes work is that we're only seeing the colors that are reflected from something, not the colors that are absorbed. So everything around us is absorbing light and reflecting light, and the color that it's reflecting is the color we see, and then it's absorbing the other waves of color. So it's kind of a mystery because we can't see any differently. So, but that's what it's doing. So these plants here are absorbing the red, blue, purple, all the other waves of light and reflecting the green waves. So, do you remember this last week we planted these? I know we had two classes, so I'm not sure. I took the tray that started growing. These are all the cucumbers that have been growing this last week. They're looking good.
Oh yeah, where did our trays go?
So I have the other, there was 6. I have the other 5 at home. These are the only ones that have sprouted, so I brought these as the demo, and the other ones just look like dirt still. But next week, I'm sure everything else will be sprouted, and I'll bring them all back so we can look at them and divide them up and take them home and stuff. But you can see what they've been up to. These are their cotyledons. These are their baby leaves. So it's their first set of leaves. It's what the seed has inside, the energy to create these first ones. And then once they have these, they're nice and broad so they can absorb as much light from the sun as possible and use that to create energy to grow their adult leaves. So it's really critical at this stage that they get all the light they can, which is why we have them under these lights here. And they've been outside at my house to get, and I've been keeping them really well watered since it's been so hot this last week. So where were we here? So leaves have different shapes, just like I was pointing out with these, the cotyledons. They're nice and broad. If you look outside, all the deciduous trees, all the trees that lose their leaves in winter, they typically have nice broad leaves to absorb as much sun as they can in the short amount of time that they have leaves. And then evergreen trees, does anyone have any idea why they have little thin leaves typically? Any ideas? Hey, come on in. Have a seat. We're just talking about leaves. So evergreen trees typically have thin leaves so that they can absorb light throughout the year, but also when it rains or when it snows, they're not being weighed down really heavily by the snow and rain. It can just pass right through. So everybody remembers when it snowed randomly in April. A lot of the trees out there had their big leaves out, and because the snow hit the big leaves and weighed them down, a lot of the trees broke. So that's kind of the benefit of having evergreens with thin leaves, is that it allows all that to pass through. But the deciduous trees that have leaves only in the growing season, like spring, summer, fall, they're nice and broad. They want to absorb as much sunlight as possible and turn it into as much energy as they can. So they have nice, broad, wide leaves. Do you have a question?
Are they evergreens generally pointy shaped for the same reason?
Yeah. So they're conical shape a lot of the time for the same reason. So it kind of creates a wider base to protect the forest floor, which is another benefit of leaves is, it's not only absorbing sun, but it's also creating shade for below. So, trees are protecting their own roots and also sending water as far as they can to saturate their own roots by using the leaves. So yeah, it's a good observation. All right. So if you guys want to follow along here, do you want to give the two new students a... Oh, that's okay. I think they're just all sharing anyways. Here's these for them.
Jacobson just dropped off art supplies.
Oh, awesome.
There may be cyan paper in there. I just don't know what it looks like.
Okay, we'll have a look. Thank you. All right. Sweet. So a lot of the plants we'll grow in the garden also have those big, broad leaves for the same reason. They're absorbing as much light as they can to turn it into fruit or flowers or whatever we're trying to grow, because they have a short growing season. A lot of garden vegetables and fruits are annuals. They only have 1 year lifespan. So they want to do as much as they can, use as much sun as they can in the 1 year that they are growing. So typically their leaves are really wide. And when we go out into the garden, we can observe and see if we can find any vegetables that have narrow leaves and kind of wonder why that might be. A lot of times the narrower leaves are letting more light into the roots or more water into the roots. So sometimes those kind of plants need more of those resources. So we can kind of do some observation and see if we can assess why that is. So like I said, also with shade, it's really important for leaves to be shading the ground, because in hot weeks, hot months like we have right now, the ground dries out really quickly. So those wide leaves on all the plants is protecting the roots from drought and from drying out. And also, like I was saying, when it rains, diverting the water towards where it's needed most, the root zone of the plant. So let's talk a little bit about air, the other really important part of photosynthesis. So plants take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and they release oxygen, which is what we need to breathe. So plants need that carbon dioxide to convert food, to convert light into energy for them to survive. And we also talked about the importance of air when we were making our soil last week. So last week we built soil. We had all the raw ingredients and put them together. And one of the raw ingredients that we needed was something to create air space. So we used these little white pieces of pumice, and we also used vermiculite. We had a couple different options, but that creates air space in the soil, which is really helpful for the plants to send out roots. Can you all see the roots coming down through here? So without those air pockets, the plant would have a lot of trouble and resistance in sending out the roots. So it's really important to have that root space so that water can run through those channels and the roots can also run through those channels and take up air also within the root system. And the airspace also prevents compaction, which is a big problem in an urban space. I think we talked about this a little last week. So when there's vehicles, when there's construction things, when there's housing, when there's pathways where there's feet walking on the soil's becoming compacted. And when it's compacted, it has a harder time taking up water or having root systems. So oftentimes when there's compacted soil, it's bare. Nothing can grow there. So it's really important to keep where we want to grow plants light and fluffy. And we try not to walk on it for that same reason. And then it just allows the plants to have more space for the roots and for water. When we're growing plants indoors, like with this grow kit, having air is also really important because airflow kind of, it's available outside, there's wind outside, but inside we have a lot less air movement. So if it's by a window and the window's open, it'll get a little airflow. Even just the fluctuation of temperature being by the window will create some airflow. But if we have plants like this under grow lights in a house, we would want to have airflow with a little fan, or you can also use your hand to simulate air moving around. That strengthens the stems of the plants actually by kind of mimicking the way wind would blow the stems. So as we even brush our hands over a plant, we're strengthening those little stems, making it a stronger plant. Air circulation is really important outside too, because especially in urban areas, we have fences or we have other houses around, and it kind of creates a sheltered space where air is blocked. So airflow is blocked by other houses or by fences or other trees. We almost live in like little bowls that are kind of airproof in some ways. And so especially in the Pacific Northwest where it's really moist, that can lead to fungus on plants or different kinds of mold, which leads to bugs. So airflow is a super important part to keep plants healthy. And where there isn't good airflow, you kind of have to use your best judgment on ways to create it by pruning trees or moving plants around. It's a little difficult, but yeah, it's something to observe when we're outside. If you see, I can point out some powdery mildew, which is a big problem around here. It looks like white powder on the leaves, and that's from bad airflow in the garden. Okay. So can anyone guess how many trees it takes to make enough oxygen for us to live for one day? Any guesses? Who thinks 5? No? Who thinks 1? Do you have any guesses?
What was your question again?
How many trees are needed to make oxygen for us for one day?
I'm gonna say 1.
1? 3? 6? You made me count.
For one person?
So we need 1 to 4 trees per person, and that's not even taking into consideration the other carbon we need to survive. So when we grow food, it creates carbon in an industrialized setting. When we drive cars, we're creating carbon. We're doing a lot of things to increase the carbon footprint in our lives. So for everything we do, we need more trees to offset that. So just to breathe alone, it takes 1 to 4 trees. And to do any of those other things, we need trees. So that's why trees are super important, especially around us in an urban environment. Another thing that trees do in the urban environment and plants is that they're shading the ground. And you could tell yesterday and the day before, it was almost 100 degrees here. And if you were under shade, you were probably a lot happier than if you were standing on pavement. So, planting trees, keeping plants alive in your neighborhoods and your community, that's a great way to keep your community safe from heat and happy, able to breathe, have clean air, clean water. It's filtering water as it goes down the streets, raining on your neighborhoods. So trees are vital for our communities to be healthy. All right. So let's talk about these grow lights for a little bit. So a grow light is an artificial light source, obviously. It mimics natural light coming from the sun. So grow lights allow plants to grow indoors, and it gives them the full spectrum of light, depending on your light. This is a full spectrum light, so this is actually creating the entire rainbow of light right now, even though it looks white to us. The plants are getting all of the wavelengths that it needs to grow. So you could technically grow plants full-time indoors. I personally use them just for starting seeds, mostly. because once the sun's out in effect, like I like to use the sun and less energy, but you can extend your growing season by starting things indoors and giving them a little beginning time, or growing things year-round. So you could technically grow food year-round, even in a place like Portland, by using grow lights. These are the most efficient, LED lights are the most efficient light available because it gives off a minimal amount of heat for a minimal amount of wattage needed. So this one actually does get a little bit warm. So we'll talk about that when we talk about setting up your own, if you're going to take a kit home. But these lights emit light in a specific range. So this is mostly providing the red and blues that we talked about earlier, with a little bit of the deep reds, a little bit of green, and deep blue spectrums too. So our plants are pretty happy under here. Some lights will only provide certain wavelengths, and so the plants will grow, but then they'll start to get a little thin, or they'll start to turn purple. Different issues will come about because they don't have all the spectrums they need. The best thing to do, the way to set them up, is to have them pretty close to the light source. So if we were setting this up at home, we'd want to have it just an inch or two away from the tops of the plants so that they're getting as much of the light and there's not a lot of waste coming off the sides. I even go as far as putting something reflective around. So I'll have a box around this with foil or something so that it's really reflecting every bit of light and not wasting any. It's all going to the plants. So these LED lights are using ultraviolet, infrared, and visible light. So some kinds of light affect flower and root formation, some influence the plant's growth. So it needs all of them to complete its growth cycle. So it might start growing and then kind of die off if you don't have the right lights. So it's really important to have the full spectrum. Or you can just start them off and then get them outside as soon as you can. So let's see.
So if you were just starting this at home, you wouldn't want to get just a regular old light bulb and like put it in your closet and just keep the light on, because it doesn't have that full range, as she's saying, of light to give to the plants.
Yeah.
Like the sun.
Yeah.
So this is like a fake sun, I guess, if you want to call it that, so that it gets all of the different types of lights that you need.
Yep, exactly. And it's also giving off a little heat. So just like the sun, the plants are thriving, especially plants that like a little bit of heat, like summer plants. So this is doing a good job of mimicking the sun for us as much as possible. All right, so today we're going to head outside in a little bit, and we're going to do some activities. We're going to observe some wide leaves versus thin leaves like we talked about and collect some different examples. We can also collect some flowers, and we're going to make some of these. These are called cyanotype sheets. So basically this is a photo paper, and you're going to put plants on top of it and let the light hit them. It's a little overcast today, so we're going to do an experiment and see if we leave things outside or under the grow lights, which one works better on a cloudy day. So what we're going to look for is some interesting shaped leaves to collect, especially ones with some space in between. So it'd be a good way to compare that. And then we're also going to think about the strength of the sun and how that is affecting the paper versus this full strength light that we have in here. So it'll be a good way to kind of calculate how the sun works. One other thing I wanted to note is, so plants need 6 to 8 hours, vegetables, fruiting plants, and flowering plants, things that we're going to eat, they need 6 to 8 hours of sun a day. So if you're growing stuff outside, it's pretty critical to have full sun, which is essentially 6 to 8 hours a day. If you're growing things inside, you can turn the lights on and off to mimic that. So we want to give them what would be like a full day of sun. For seedlings, I do 12 but for older plants, they can do 6 to 8. So, yeah, so in a garden setting, we're going to kind of pay attention to that. If you're being shaded by a tree for half of the day, your plants aren't going to get a full day of sun. Some plants like that. Some plants like to be blocked from the late afternoon sun, which is the hottest sun of the day. So when the sun's traveling across the sky, it's actually heating up the earth that whole time. And so the end of the day is when it's at its peak heat. So sometimes blocking that late afternoon sun is advantageous to your plants for growth. They want a little shade at that point of the day. So you got to kind of be strategic when you're assessing your garden space and looking at the light. It's sometimes good to just pay attention to what the light's doing throughout the day and kind of get a sense of where the strongest light is, where there's a little bit of shade, and then, you know, using that knowledge to figure out what seeds to put where. Some things like lettuce and cabbages like a little bit of coolness. Some things like tomatoes and cucumbers, they like to be hot all day. So it takes a little trial and error sometimes, but all right, that's pretty much it for the lesson. Are we ready to go outside? All right. So we're going to take our scissors